Hello, it's Sue Anstis here, and just before you listen to this episode of The Game Changers, I wanted to quickly tell you that my new documentary, Game On, The Unstoppable Rise of Women's Sport, is now available to watch on Netflix in the UK. It's a powerful film that explores the recent growth in women's sport and its impact across society. It will open your eyes to the challenges faced by female athletes and bring hope for a future where women and girls have equal access and opportunity in sport. I really hope you enjoy it. Now it's time for the Game Changers. Hello and welcome to the Game Changers. I'm Sue Anstis, and this is the podcast where you'll hear from trailblazing women in sport. A big thanks to Barclays for supporting this series of The Game Changers, which will focus on fearless women in football. My guest today is sports broadcasting legend Gabby Logan. I began by asking Gabby about her earliest memories of sport.
My earliest memories of sport would be, I suppose, very, very early on. After dinner, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, we would always go into the garden and play something with my dad, because there were 3 of us born within 3 years. So kind of we would have been 2, 3 and 4, or 3, 4 and 5. And so while my mum was clearing up after dinner, to get us out of her hair, my dad would take us to the garden and we'd play rounders, or he'd put jumpers for goalposts. We'd make a tennis court out of jumpers, and we had a big kind of a flat lawn, so we were able to do lots of different games. So I suppose, as well as PE in school and your pants and vest, that would have been the earliest kind of and the reason why I call it sport, Sue, and not just hanging about after dinner, is because there was this element of competition. So we were encouraged to win in those after dinner games. It wasn't just kind of for fun. So yeah.
Excellent. And you mentioned your dad there. So obviously he's a very famous footballer at Leeds and went on to be a successful manager both nationally, internationally and at club level. Was football ever an option you considered?
No, not at all. It wasn't played by girls that I knew. I didn't know, I didn't see any girls playing it. I think, a couple of times a tennis ball, because the boys played with tennis ball on the playground, a tennis ball might have come in our direction, and we tried to kick it back, and we would just it was never considered that we would join in. And certainly in PE it wasn't offered at all. And the only time it came across my radar that girls would be playing, well, first of all, I went to live in Canada when I was a kid, and in North America girls did play football, soccer, but that was it outside of school as well. So it just didn't really happen. I was really into gymnastics and swimming and athletics and things. And then when we came back to England, I went to high school in Leeds, Cardinal Heenan, and about what would now be the year 8, 9, it would have been year 9, our school decided to enter a 5-a-side team into a local tournament, and they got a former Leeds United player to come and be our coach. And we did these sessions indoors in a very tight wooden floored indoor sports hall. And we never got entered for some reason, whether they thought we weren't skillful enough. We just didn't we had a few sessions, and then that was it. So that was literally the only time that and I was one of the 5 that turned up, for the 5-a-side.
Who knows what might have been if you'd have.
I watch the game now and think, I wonder, because I played team sports like netball and things. I wonder if I'd have been any good, or I wonder if, because in terms of the physicality and the all the attributes, the kind of fitness and things, I think I would have been all right. But I'm not sure about the skills.
And it's not just, I guess we talk about your dad because he was so immersed in sport, but your mum's quite an extraordinary and inspiring woman as well. So can you tell us a little bit about her?
Yeah, she was, when they met, actually, they met very, very young. My dad was playing for Leeds United, and he went over to a cafe across the road to get all the sandwiches for the players at lunchtime. And my mum was the daughter of the woman who owned and ran it, my granny. And she was doing her A-levels, but she used to work in there some afternoons. And that's how they met. She kind of handed over the sandwich order to him, and he was going to some kind of official function and needed to take somebody, and he decided that my mum would be a good person to take, and so that's kind of where their courting started. And she was considering options of where she would go for further education, and we're not a family that everybody went to university or anything, and she was looking at going to a college down in Canterbury, and my dad didn't want her to do that because they were in Leeds, and so she took a course in beauty therapy. I think the course in Canterbury was art related to architecture, and the course in Manchester was beauty therapy at the Manchester Technical College or something. So she would go over a few nights a week to Manchester, stay in digs, and then come back. And so for the early part of their relationship, she was a beauty therapist and had her own salon. but her passion was property and architecture. And so she kind of juggled her work with us when we were kids. And then as we got a bit older and she had an opportunity to start buying some property and doing it up, that's what she did. And she ended up in the early 2000s with a lot of her own personal portfolio property, but also a lot of big sites, building flats and, achieving kind of what she'd set out, early on to do. So she's always been a grafter. I'm kind of from a family of, the women have always worked and done, not always particularly glamorous or really exciting careers, but they've always worked. And so she was from that lineage. So yeah, so she's always been a great role model in that sense in terms of juggling family life and work.
Oh, that's good to hear, isn't it? And are you represented Wales and Great Britain at rhythmic gymnastics growing up. So when were you first aware of that as a sport?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't know much about it. And when I came back to Leeds from Vancouver and I was about 10, I was going to be Wimbledon champion. That was my plan. And I loved tennis so much. And I played loads in Vancouver. And it was so easy to do sport there because each area community had a recreational centre. And for about $1, you could try any sport. So you could turn up and play ice hockey. You could do trampolining, and I was doing all these different sports and absolutely loving it. But tennis, I had my best mate at school was really good at tennis. And so we just played tennis together. And she was a member of a really posh private club. We weren't. So she used to take me down there. And then she took me to Palm Springs for a week in the spring break for a tennis camp, So I was living the life. And I decided I was going to go to Nick Boltieri's academy in Florida because I'd seen a documentary. So I made a pitch for that. My parents didn't go with it. So we came back to England and I thought, I'll continue with the tennis. And we turned up in Leeds in the October of that year. And it would have been 1983. And there were no tennis courts, literally none. My mum said, there's some courts by Roundy Park in Leeds. Well, they were locked up already because it was October. Nobody plays tennis in October. And you can play for 2 weeks on the other side of Wimbledon, but, don't be silly. You can't play then. So there was one, I went to the Yellow Pages. There was one club in Leeds, which was a squash and rackets club. And they did have an indoor tennis court. Brilliant. I could continue. And it was going to cost £3,000 a year to be a member. Oh, barrier to entry. And we do have a discount for junior members, but you have to play in the afternoon. I go to school. I remember this conversation on the phone. I was about 10 or 11 going, this isn't happening. And so by accident, I followed my sister, who was really into sports acrobatics and rhythmic from her time in Coventry. And I followed her to gym. I think it was easier for my mum to drop us both in the same place. So she encouraged me. She said, well, while the tennis is coming back, why don't you just go with your sister? And that was it. I'd seen my sister doing it in Coventry because they had a really big club. And I used to go at the racket centre I played in Coventry. They had rhythmic on the next court. They were all doing gymnastics. So I'd seen it and thought it was beautiful and, enjoyed watching it. So I kind of went along with no expectations and just really got hooked.
And we hear a lot, don't we, about teenage girls dropping out of sport at that 13, 14 stage. Was that ever an option for you? Or once you'd found it at that age, you loved it?
No, I never, I knew it wasn't going to be a career. I wasn't going to make a living out of being a rhythmic gymnast. And I wasn't going to even get more than, I got a little bit of a sports aid grant to help with travel and things, but I didn't get any kind of funding. So, but I never thought about dropping out. I knew the end would come probably through injury or, just age and having to move on in life. But I was as committed as ever at 15, 16. I wasn't that bothered. I had really good friends because I wasn't that bothered about going out. But when I did have some time, they would welcome me. They didn't kind of make it that, you never come out, so you're not coming out now. So my mum always said to me, actually, I think she recognised how lucky I was with that particular group of girls, that they were so supportive. And even though they weren't massively sporty, a couple of them played netball, but they weren't hugely into sport. So I was as passionate about it, I think, through those years as ever.
And what are your memories of performing on the biggest of stages? So Commonwealth Games? I think
the bigger the competition, the more the nerves. That's all. I always struggled with nerves because I trained brilliantly and I liked the idea of competition because it felt like a point to the training. But I just, on match day, so to speak, I just would have to really work hard to control those nerves because it's such a precision sport. So, you have to be so on it. And that was a kind of thing that right to the end, I kind of had to use all the kind of tools I had. I remember seeing a sports psychologist towards the very end. They used to send one to Lillishall to chat to us, and actually decided I was going to be a sports psychologist after meeting them, and got tools to kind of help calm the nerves and things. But the only time I ever experienced nerves like it again was when I did Strictly years later.
Absolutely. And gymnastics has come under the spotlight recently for having quite that toxic training environment. Is that something that you saw or experienced yourself, do you think?
No, No, nothing like I've read about, and nothing like I've seen in Athlete A, obviously the Netflix documentary. I mean, I can believe that there are extremes that happen in the sport. It didn't in my. I mean, I had coaches who were tough and who wanted you to, fit a certain criteria, and and gymnastics is a sport that it has a strange kind of body expectation where you're almost fighting puberty the whole time. You're fighting your body's natural development, and that was hard. I think I probably did have a certain amount of a kind of controlled eating kind of disorder, if that makes sense. I never got ill because I didn't want to be ill, but I wanted to keep my body looking a certain way. So I really kind of was very controlled about what I ate and what I drank and how I lived my life. I didn't like having no energy, so I didn't want to starve myself, but I did understand, kind of that. I think I was always rational almost about it, which sounds a bit perverse, but that's not, that's not a healthy way to be, obviously. And I think if I'd known about nutrition as much as I know now, I'd have been in a much better place. I think then the idea was, well, you either ate or you didn't eat. It wasn't a case of eating the right things. So there was that element to it, which I think did prevail a lot through a lot of my peers. And there was the other part of it is, I guess, being told you're not good at something and having to do it again, that's a hard thing to hear. And you did hear that a lot. And I think that probably made me quite resilient, and, it gives you a certain amount of rigor. But you can coach in a way like that is healthy. It doesn't have to be abusive, or you don't have to get the best out of somebody. Shouting at them doesn't always work. Sometimes ignoring somebody can be as damaging. And there were certainly coaches. We had a Russian coach who came along, and she had a brutal way about her of just literally, she just wouldn't even pay attention to people she thought had no talent, which was harder almost than being shouted at. So I do understand that the sport can kind of lean towards that. And we all heard about these stories about Eastern European gymnasts and the kind of things they were put through. So I think in any sport, and we've seen all kinds of different stories come from other Olympic sports as well, in any sport, when it becomes so damaging to an individual and the enjoyment, why do you start doing it? I mentioned, my first experience was after dinner having, fun in the garden. That's why we all start sport. We start because there's an enjoyment, there's a joy that comes through us. And you've always got to have some of that there, even at the very, very top of your game, I think.
And why did you eventually stop competing?
I got quite bad sciatica before I went to the Commonwealth Games, and I was managing it and taking quite strong painkillers. And I came back, and I knew I'd have a bit of a break after that because it'd been a very intense period of training. I had to train right through Christmas, Boxing Day, because it was at the end of January. And doing A-levels, it's quite a hard juggle. And I came back expecting to take a few weeks off, and the back just not using it made it worse, and it kind of seized up, and I would literally get out of bed in the morning and have to lie back down again or just crumble to the floor, and it was very painful. And I think at that stage in my life, I was kind of juggling my A-levels, last year of A-levels, looking ahead to an Olympic Games, which seemed now very out of reach. And I knew there were two girls who were going to still be better than me, and it was 2 places only. And I think I came to a decision that actually my long-term bodily health was probably more important. And as I said at the very beginning, I knew it wasn't going to be a career that I was going to earn a living from. So it didn't feel like I should put myself through 6 months of really hard rehab or risk damaging my back with an operation or anything like that. So I kind of went over to the other side of sport and just tried to get back to enjoying it for its own sake.
And what did you miss most when you came away from that level?
I would say to this day that the thing that I really acutely missed at the time was the purpose, the sense of competition, the preparation, the whole, the joy, the buzz of performing. I thought, oh my gosh, I've done the best thing. I'm only 17, 18, and I've done the best thing. And what am I ever going to do that's going to give me that? And so I was a bit of a kind of loon for the first year. I was literally going to the swimming pool and swimming for exercise, then looking at the clock thinking, could I be a swimmer? Is that quick enough? And then I'd do cross country for school and think, well, I was halfway down the field today, but maybe I could be a cross country. I was always looking for that next sport. And actually, if I'd been perhaps around somewhere, maybe if I'd been near a rowing club, or if I'd been near a velodrome, I might have gotten a bike, or, because I could have potentially have done those kinds of sports that weren't as technical, if you like, as, swimming is obviously is a very young sport. So I was kind of in the wilderness, like looking for this non-existent sport that might give me that joy again. And I did feel like for a couple of years, gosh, that's it. I've done the best thing, and I've got another 80 years of life. So I knew sport still gave me joy to watch, and and I always wanted to keep fit. But yeah, there isn't anything quite like that experience. I think live telly's given me a few moments of adrenaline for sure, though.
And do you feel that experience at the top level of sport then helped you when you were interviewing athletes at those big events?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I feel from lots of other perspectives in my life, obviously my husband was an international rugby player. My dad was an international footballer and a manager. And so I know what it's like to be the child of a manager who gets sacked. You know, when you come home, your dad's car's on the drive after school and it shouldn't be. You know, there's a reason for that. You know, I remember walking in the house one day and seeing his car and thinking, he's got the sack. We knew it was coming. We felt it might be coming, but there's those kind of experiences. There's living with somebody who kicks for his country and has a really bad day at the office where he misses 70% of his kicks and, you know, thinks the world's going to end. And so although, of course, you have to kind of ask the right questions of your pundits and put people kind of, you know, who are up there through a certain amount of scrutiny, there's also a human side to every sporting performance. And there's a family behind that. And there are people who care about that individual. So I think all of those give me a certain insight, I guess, to what the performers are going through, the athletes, the sports people.
And you talk about family there. Are you okay to talk a little bit about what happened with your brother?
Yes, of course, yeah.
A devastating time for your family. So personally, how did you get through that? And you I guess you stopped your sport not long before as well as an avenue.
Yeah, I think so. He died in 1992, and that Olympics was the Olympics that I'd had in mind. That summer was the Olympics that I was, you know, thinking would be the one that I would go towards. So I'd stopped about a year before that, and he died of a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is just sudden death, effectively. So we had no warning at all that he had a congenital heart defect, which meant that from the outside and ostensibly his fitness was just beyond, you know, he was in the top 0.00% of 1% of people. He was a footballer signed for Leeds United, could run all day long, played sport all the time, but his heart was enlarged and basically was, you know, about to give way and to pack up on him. But there was nothing, you know, no signs at all, never breathless. And so when he did die, he died in the garden playing football with my dad. He was just kicking the ball about and keeled over. It was absolutely cataclysmic, as a, you know, just there was a sledgehammer kind of coming down and shattering the family into a million pieces, because there was all the kind of, you know, there's no preparation, there's no sense of, you know, even if somebody dies suddenly at 78, it feels young, but they're 78. When a child dies so young, obviously, there's such a fallout amongst the whole family. So it did in many ways define the kind of rest of our youth and has certainly defined the way the family has kind of gone on from those years and leaves its mark in many ways.
And you were about to then head off to here on a gap year, go to university. Did you consider not going at the time? Was that an option? Or actually,
I was at the end of my gap year because he died in the May, and so I was going off to Durham in the autumn, and I kind of put my gap year, which hadn't been very fruitful in terms of any travel or anything. Anyway, I was doing about 6 jobs in London, and I came home and just stayed at home really then. So I kind of took over the running of the family because my mum was in a very obviously, you can imagine she just kind of stopped. She was immobilised, and my dad was managing Wales. And after a few weeks, he went off with Wales, and so my mum had a property business. I was kind of running around wallpapers for her and dropping things off to builders and things like that. And I definitely wanted to go, you know, to Durham, and I was glad I'd chosen a university that wasn't far away from the family home in Leeds, so that I could get home quickly and be around if I needed to. Because my little brother was only 6 at the time, and my sister had been living abroad. So the family was, you know, kind of all going on its journey. So it was important to me to be able to get home, and as much as a comfort for me to just go sit on his bed or, you know, just rifle through his wardrobe and touch his clothes and be around his things. So it was a really hard time. Really hard time for everybody, and as I say, to this day, you know, the ramifications are still there.
Absolutely. And you went, they say, to Durham. So you studied law at university.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And was that a passion? I watched before here. Actually, watched you on the Rose of Tralee video. It's quite funny. But you talk there about wanting to do. I'll gloss over that, but it is quite entertaining. But you talk about wanting to do sports media, sports journalism, even then, and that's before university, isn't it?
Yeah, I think because I'd gone on Blue Peter as a gymnast, I'd wanted to go into TV. When I was 15, I went on Blue Peter to advertise a gymnastics competition that I was involved in for Great Britain, and I loved it. I loved the studio. I thought this was amazing, but I didn't know anybody in my family that worked in broadcasting, or, you know, my dad obviously had come across journalists, so I would tap into their knowledge. What should I do? How do I get into telly? And of course they said, just get lots of experience in all kinds of forms of media. And so I'm kind of, when somebody sent me that clip, I was surprised I said that, because actually, I just wanted to go into telly. I didn't know because I didn't see women doing sports presenting. Des Lynam was the presenter of the time, the sports presenter of the time, and Bob Willis and, Coleman, all those people. So I suppose I wanted to try and do something in the sports world. But yeah, that surprised me when I saw it, that I actually said that, because I thought I'd have to be either Jeremy Paxman or Zoe Ball. I thought they were the two career routes that I would take.
You clearly always knew. And you discovered radio at university, so you got radio experience at university. What did you work on there? The
radio station in Newcastle, which is only about 15 miles from Durham, what was called Metro FM. It's like the capital of the city. And I met, in my gap year, I'd met the programme controller at a friend's party. And I said, I'm coming up to Durham and I'd really like to work in broadcasting. He said, well, I'll give you some work experience. And I rang him the minute I arrived in Durham, and I had a car, so it meant I could get over to Newcastle. So I'd go over every couple of afternoons a week, and I'd learn to kind of compile the news bulletin, work in the newsroom. And then he said to me, right, I want you to start news reading. So by the Christmas, I was doing my first bulletins reading, and by the January, he was paying me to do it. And so I did a few shifts a week, and then I'd do weekends, and then eventually he gave me a show, and it kind of went on to the point where, when I graduated, I got the breakfast show. That was my job. It was my first job. So it was like doing an apprenticeship while I was doing my law degree. But I still kind of really enjoyed my degree. And I went to Edinburgh with a play, the Edinburgh Festival, and I took part in. I was the president of the Union Society, and I did stuff with the college. I was deputy president of the college. So I did immerse myself in college life, university life. Durham's a collegiate system. So that was all really important. But I had this other second life going on at the side. So your big summer holidays when you're a student go from, the beginning of June practically right the way through to kind of middle of September. And I'd just work every day on the radio station. I'd live in somebody's student house that, because a lot of students keep the house over the summer. And then, so I'd just rent somebody's house. Or my then boyfriend lived in Newcastle. So I'd stay at his parents' house, and I just carried on working, really.
And then not long after leaving university, you got an opportunity at Sky. How did that come about for you?
So I was in my first year post-university doing the breakfast show, and I kept hanging out with the sports team at the end of every show. A breakfast show is amazing. You have to get up at 4, but you finish at 9. So I was, and it was a perfect job for a 22-year-old, because you've got so much energy, like now the idea of getting up at 4 every day fills me with, dread. I feel sick in my stomach thinking about early mornings like that. And I go to the sports team at the end of the shift, and I'd start chatting about Newcastle United, and we'd talk about sport. So the boss said to me, you're always hanging out with the sports team. I thought I was getting told off. I was like, oh, sorry. And I was like, no. So you really like sport, and you're really passionate about it, and you always talk about it on the show. Why don't you do interviews for us at St. James's Park at the weekends, on Saturdays, or home games? I was like, oh my gosh, this is an actual job. It's a thing. I can go. And they were brilliant, the sports team. The commentator was amazing. And I used to have such a laugh and loved it so much, and became kind of, really passionate about the team. It was the Kevin Keegan team that nearly won the league. Oh, yeah. And the last day of the season was, in May, obviously, was the day when Newcastle officially threw it away because Man United won at Middlesbrough. So Sky had 2 teams doing both matches, because they had a helicopter with the trophy because they didn't know where it was going to go. Oh. And well, I think we could have all told them, but our as if Brian Robson's Middlesbrough were not going to be beaten by Man United anyway. And so I was at St James's Park, and so was Richard Keys. They were doing the live match from there. And unbeknown to me, he'd given his business card to a cameraman and said he was making a documentary about women in sport. And he wasn't. He said, look, I'm not making that. He said, but I wanted you to call me because I want to introduce you to my boss at Sky. And I think they'd really like you. And he just kind of handed me over, if you like, to this boss at Sky, who rang me. And well, I rang him, and he said, we'd like you to come down for a screen test. So they flew me down, they bought a flight, and I went down, and they picked me up from Osterley and got at the airport, and I got into the studios and did a screen test, and then they offered me a job. So it was a real kind of, it was a proper kind of movie moment. Do you know what I mean? In those moments where you think this feels like a film. I'm like, I've got my chance as just, the kind of thing that you really imagine would be a wonderful experience. And it was just so fantastic to kind of because I was really getting to the point where I was like, okay, I want to do something else, and I can't stay in the Northeast, forever. I really want to go and cut my teeth in some kind of proper telly, and because I was doing a little bit on a local show for Tyne Tees called Gabby with Gabby, where I take famous people out for dinner, and so, but it was pre-recorded stuff, and so then I got the chance, and Sky was amazing because I got to do hours of live telly, and there's nothing like experience to get experience, and I think it's all right doing stuff on YouTube or filming yourself on a camera, but actually doing live telly is very, very important if you want to work in live telly. So I was doing it, but also not doing it with a massive audience, because it was a 6 o'clock news program and a 10 o'clock program. So most people at 6 or 10 are watching a certain news program that's on BBC One. They're not watching the lower levels of Sky as it was at the time. It was kind of Sky 3 or whatever. I think my mum rarely watched. So it was. So we were living in an age with no social media. So even though I'm sure there were blokes watching it thinking, what's a woman telling me the cricket scores for? What's a woman telling? I didn't know they were saying that, because they didn't have social media to send me some trolling or, So although I've had a fair amount of that over the years, that was lucky for me that at that young, very, very kind of raw age where I was learning, cutting my teeth and learning my skills, I didn't have to deal with that. It was, if you wanted to abuse somebody, then you had to actually write a letter, and most of those people can't be bothered. So the only letters I got were very sweet ones, sending me chocolates and things like that, from slightly strange addresses. So I even got a pair of tights once sent in the post, which I'm not sure what that was about. People don't send gifts in that way. I remember having some chocolates in my house, and my mum's a chocoholic, and I haven't got a sweet tooth, and she said, oh, I could just do something sweet after dinner. I said, oh, I've got these chocolates, and she said, where are they from? Somebody sent me them. She went, oh, even I'm not sure I could eat those. So it was a fun time, and it could have been a lot different, I think, if I'd been cutting my teeth in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had an early boss who said he thought you'd never present live sport. Did that not put you off at all? You weren't put off by...
I must have had really thick skin. So I would do these bulletins, and in between the 6 and 10 o'clock bulletin, we'd get dinner, we'd watch the match if it was on, if there's a match on, and rewrite some stories for the 10 o'clock bulletin. My boss was always there till about 8, and I'd always be knocking on his door saying, oh, when are you going to give me some live sport? I'd like to do football. And, so I remember him one day saying to me, Gabby, even a tightrope walker has dull days at work, and I was like, no, I'm not having a dull day at work. I just want to do live sport. So he gave me the ice hockey. That was my first sport. I did ice hockey for a season, which was great because the mechanics of doing live ice hockey are not dissimilar to doing any other live sport, as I've discovered. Obviously you've got to learn the rules and you've got to learn about the personnel, but actually once you're live on air and you're working out what the story and the narrative of the match is and what you should talk about, it's not, a kind of a long way from doing a live football match. And again, it had even fewer viewers than the sports bulletin. So, and in fact, my first live match was up in Ayr, because the Ayr Scottish Eagles were one of the teams in the league, and we had a fire alarm go off, and I was left presenting on my own. Even the cameraman locked off and went out, and I'm in an empty stadium. So all those kinds of experiences that you need to be able to handle on live television, I got in spades. So it was a great season, but I still wanted to do football. And then the other boss at Sky told me that if I wasn't on his screen doing it by the age of 28, I wouldn't be doing it at all, implying perhaps that after 28 I'd be clapped or something, and I wouldn't be allowed to kind of show my face on telly. So I had this real urgency then, I think. I mean, there was a bit of an urgency with me anyway, because my brother had died. So I think I was living this kind of carpe diem times 100. And then my agent at the time, who's quite an old school agent called John Holmes, looks after Gary Lineker, he said, why are you always in such a hurry? And I said, if somebody told you at 22 you wouldn't be on telly after 28, you might be in a hurry too. And he was like, fair point, ignore him. So yeah, it was, I mean, I suppose then you start trying to prove people wrong, I guess, don't you?
Claire Balding said having parents who are very well known in racing helped her to be more accepted when she started her commentary. Did that help you, your dad's history?
Yeah, and I wasn't married, so my surname was still Yorath, and he was still managing. I mean, I interviewed him on Sky a few times, when he was managing Sheffield Wednesday.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and so he was very well known to a lot of the people who were coming in my studio, sitting in, and set and chatting to me, would say, how's your dad? Is he all right? And so that not only helped, I suppose, other people feel that, okay, she might know something. It helped me feel quite relaxed in that environment, which could be quite intimidating, I think. So at the beginning, for sure, that would have been, I agree with Claire, I suppose it's more other people's perceptions, that they they get over one hurdle at least, that you might genuinely be interested. I mean, the number of people used to say to me, do you actually like it? Like, surely with a law degree there are other things I could do if I didn't like it. I'm not it's not this or kind of stacking shelves. I'm kind of
options.
Yeah, I would hope that there were some other things if I really hated it that I could do. So yeah, you have to, because I was saying something the other day. I was talking to some women who had something to do with the Prince's Trust, and it's a very smoke and mirrors career. It looks all glamorous, but the number of times you find yourself changing in toilets and having your makeup done with sat on a toilet seat, or kind of being in some very dodgy kind of hotels eating Pringles at 2 a.m. because the restaurant's closed. That's the reality of being a sports broadcaster and life on the road. And if you thought it was all just 5-star hotels and a very glamorous job, then then you'd be disappointed very quickly.
And you went to work then to the BBC and worked on a whole range of different shows and formats. Is there a favourite type of show that you like to present?
I think nothing quite beats live, because it's the adrenaline, talking earlier on about getting that buzz. It's not just you on a pre-recorded show. I think it's everybody's slightly less kind of heightened. So you might be treating it as a live show and trying to nail it. But if everybody knows they could stop and redo something, it has that slightly kind of, there's less of a sense of urgency. And so although I enjoy doing those kind of recorded programs, and when I say live sport, obviously Match of the Day is live, and it's a good show to do from the point of view it's iconic and it's this very much in the shop window show, but it's quite formulaic. You've got your match edit, you talk about what you've seen and you move on, and so what you're going to be talking about, whereas live sport you just don't know. So that kind of is top of the heap, I guess. And we're working on things like the live athletics, world championships or Olympic games, all those things. You just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when you're going to need to fill for 20 minutes, what you're going to, so it's that thinking on your feet, which I really enjoy the most. And I guess of all the shows that aren't live sport, then Spotty is the one that I feel incredibly proud to be a part of, because it's such an iconic, I've used that word too much today, but it is that show that, feels to me like the show that when I was a kid, that Question of Sport, they were the ones that brought us all together, that even my mum, who wasn't particularly into her sport, would want to watch.
When you think back to Spotty, because actually, even very recently, we had that shortlist that was only men on the shortlist. Do you think that would happen again now? Do you think we've changed enough that won't happen again in the future?
I'm fairly sure it won't happen, but I think it's very, there's lots of arguments for and against kind of being proactive in terms of, whether we've had these conversations a lot this summer, obviously to do with race and to do with pushing, kind of people into positions because we want representation. Not when I say pushing people into positions, but making sure there's an opportunity to be there is one thing. I think it's a difference, isn't it, between not being racist and being anti-racist, and actually creating an environment where that's not just possible, but actually we're going to do this because otherwise this could take too long, this situation. And I think with regard to women on the Spotty shortlist, I think like there were a lot of people when Joanna Konta was on the list and she'd got to the semi-finals of Wimbledon, there were a few people kind of going, well, she didn't win Wimbledon, and it was that kind of, and I think, well, you know what, she's pushing further than any woman has done for a while, and we have to kind of keep putting women up there and putting women in the shop window, because actually they've been held back for 40 years, or longer in the case of some sports. But, you look at football, and obviously the game wasn't allowed to be played in this country for a long time. So of course you have to kind of, give a little shove in the back and just try and get up to the same speed. It's going to take a while. And so we need to do what we can, both with representation for anybody who's underrepresented. I think it kind of cuts across a lot of areas.
And looking back at your career over the last 25 or so years, is there anything you would do differently? Is there anything you would change or that you regret at all? I don't have masses of regrets. I think things happen for a reason. I spent a long time at ITV before I came to the BBC, and I really enjoyed that. I didn't enjoy the way it ended, and I was very glad to be given an opportunity by the BBC, which was kind of like almost starting again in terms of the people I worked with and all of that. I think, when I was really early on at Sky, I was going to do kind of my coaching badges, football coaching badges, and
I wish I had done them, because I think that would give me further insight into the game. At the time, I thought, oh, no, I'm too old. I was like, now I think, oh, God, what was I thinking? Why did I? And a friend of mine used to play locally in Richmond, and she was like, you should come down. She was a Russian lady, so I won't do her accent. But she's like, you should come down with me and play. There you go. She was amazing. She went off to live in Vancouver, and she was always covered in bruises. And I was thinking, oh, I'm not sure I want all those bruises. I've done my time being injured in sport, but maybe that, I would have been, I don't know, maybe it would have entrenched me a bit more and given me another insight into the sport.
And what do you think is the secret to being a fantastic sports presenter? What tips would you give?
I think if whatever your subject matter is, it's the passion that you have for it has to be real. And you talked earlier on about, I talked about kind of enjoying it, and I think it's, as I said before, it's not always just rocket. You don't rock up to a game and just then go home afterwards. There's lots of travel and research and all that stuff that if you didn't have the passion for it would feel quite dry. And I think that's the thing. It's bringing it to life for people and giving people, for me, sport is about the human spirit, and it's about conquering all kinds of challenges that we face, and that can then translate into other areas of life. I said last year during the Women's World Cup or afterwards that those audiences, those millions that watch those matches, were not about, oh, isn't that brilliant? 11 million people watch that match. Maybe there'll be 5 million footballers. It's 11 million people watch that. And there'll be lots of young girls watching that who see those women and think, oh, I didn't know you could be a footballer. Maybe I could be a builder. Maybe I could be the jobs that I thought, an engineer. Maybe I could do the things that I thought weren't necessarily for me, or whatever it is that they felt maybe wasn't for them. It's about opening up your mind to other possibilities. And sport does that in lots of ways, I think, in terms of how it inspires. I mean, one of the great inspiring days of my year every year is the London Marathon, and I hear what people overcome. And because I came from grassroots, most of us did at the beginning of our sporting life, the power of kind of volunteers and people who make clubs happen, who are going to be so important more than ever, I think, after Corona allows us to all get back to those things, because the money is not going to be there. And we rely on those people. We've got very used, I think, to the National Lottery has taken a lot of that slack up and does provide a platform for people to have professional careers. But we still need those grassroots sports. And like my son plays a lot of rugby, and his local club is completely grassroots. And the time that people put in, to organising, doing all the compliance, especially now, the hoops they've got to jump through to keep those sessions going. And that, for me, that link between what I sometimes sit and prevail over, kind of like, I'm sitting in an Olympic stadium with the absolute elites. I think we're just keeping that link right down to the very first journey in sport at grassroots is so important. And I've gone way away from your question, but I think that part of it comes through in the way you broadcast. I think that understanding that link.
And in terms of the women's sport and women's coverage, have you seen a fast enough change, do you think, in terms of attitudes and what's being covered, and I guess the quality of the production around women's sport too? Yeah,
massively. It's night and day from when I first started out. I regularly present a match of the day now where there'll be a woman in the director's chair and a woman in the producer's chair. I regularly do the women's football. Obviously, I'll have all women pundits, sometimes a woman producer, sometimes a man pundit as well, which I quite like. I like the fact that men talk about women's football, because I think for a lot of the male audience, it gives them a sense of being able to join in. And when I came back from France, I nipped home for a couple of days during the World Cup, and I was getting a bit of building work done at home. And my builder, who I love, who's been our builder for years and years, his son is actually Joe Edwards, who's one of the coaching trio at Chelsea. He's like Frank Lampard's right hand man, and he doesn't really watch a lot of football. But he said to me when I came home, he went, "Oh my God, that Lucy Bronze, she's unbelievable." And I was like, "Carl, have you been watching the Women's World Cup?" And he was like, "Oh, I love it." And he wasn't saying that to just kind of like try and patronise or, she's all right, love, isn't she? And I think, well, this is a breakthrough, because if men like Carl are watching and enjoying the Women's World Cup, then that's the journey we've got to go on. We can't make women's sport just for women to watch, in the same way that men's sport, we've been watching it, Sue, for years. So, I enjoyed the Gabby Sabatini and Steffi Graf matches at Wimbledon as much as I enjoyed, Boris Becker against Pat Rafter. That's we're allowed to enjoy both. And I think that's where women's sport has got to keep pushing to make sure its demographic is. That's how sponsorship, that's how branding will appeal, across a wider range, that we're not just appealing to, nobody wants their market to be so narrow, do they? You want to go, right, this is a family thing. And one of the other sites I loved in France was one day I was doing my notes, and I looked over in the stadium, and there was a guy and his daughter. They were at the England game, and they'd come over together, and they were in our hotel, coincidentally. So I was chatting to them later, and she was a massive Newcastle fan as well. I'm a Newcastle fan. And the dad wasn't even that into football. And I'm getting kind of hairs in the back of my neck now, because I said to him, what's your team? And he went, oh, I don't really follow football. And he just brought her. And I was like, that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard, And he just loved her passion so much that he took her out to the game. And that is priceless. That's what it has to be like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And do you ever feel from the men's game that you almost need to distance yourself, or you like to, because of the negative elements in terms of the gambling and racism and the homophobia that we hear? Does that frustrate you at all?
Yeah, but those things are life, aren't they? They're in life. They're not just the preserve of football. Football sometimes gets a bad rap because those things associate themselves with the most popular pastime, sport, entity in the world. Football is the number one sport in the world, played by every country. It's the easiest sport to kind of get together. It's, you get a ball and you get a group of people and you've got a game. That's why I've had this disagreement, or a heated debate with Seb Coe about that in athletics once, because he was saying, oh, football's bigger than, athletics is the biggest sport. And well, everybody can run, obviously, Seb, but, we're talking about the global reach of the sports. And it was a tongue in cheek, obviously. It wasn't a serious debate. But the thing about football is that because of that, it attracts, everything, doesn't it? And it's kind of a microcosm of sometimes the very worst of society and sometimes the best of society. And I think, if we pretend it's not there, if we pretend that racism only happens in a football ground, we're foolish, aren't we? That's where it's emanating. That's where it's coming out. But it's there. And the same thing with homophobia, and the same thing. Gambling is a big problem in society, and so are other things. So I think it's not a reason to not enjoy a sport. You only need to walk past a park in a Saturday morning, and you see kids playing football and enjoying the sport and in a very pure form and having a great time and keeping fit. And again, it goes back to this grassroots thing. Kylian Mbappe didn't start out life as Kylian Mbappe, the multi-billionaire footballer, multi-millionaire footballer. He started out as a kid playing football in the park. And that is how everybody's journey begins.
You've recently launched your podcast, The Midpoint, which is fantastic. Why did you feel you wanted to make this new show?
About a year ago, I'd had this idea for it, and then lockdown just pushed me into action because I couldn't do very much live sports presenting because there wasn't very much live sport. So I had time to get my guests together. And it was also, as you know, you can do a podcast in any which way. You don't have to be physically present with somebody. And I'm 47, and there was a moment kind of where I kind of looked at myself in the mirror one day, walked past the mirror, I was like, oh gosh, I am older, because inside I feel like I look totally different to my face sometimes.
I'm still 24, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not that I want to be younger, and I just feel I've got the energy, and there's lots of things I want to do. And so I explored this with a few people kind of that I work with, and talking to people about, I didn't want it to become just about the menopause or just about kind of women. I wanted it to be about the middle of life and what we can all, where we're all at and what we're doing, and speaking to some of my friends who are more well known, and realizing that they had good stories to tell, and to try and also engage people to think, actually, and ironically, the government seems to be trying to get everybody to change careers, but also to think that, you know what, I'm 47, but actually I've always wanted to do this. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to just go, oh, well, I'm never going to get a chance to do that now,
Too late.
Yeah, exactly. My first guest was John Bishop, who only started making money from stand-up comedy when he was 40. Before that, he sold pharmaceutical drugs, So, and Richard Osman, who's on an episode, has obviously just written an amazing best-selling book. Yeah. And he's just got the second and third book deal. He's such a polymath. But he wasn't on telly till he was 40. Before that, he made telly. He was excellent at making telly, but that could have been the rest of his life, being excellent at making telly. And then he did Pointless and became a different creature. I don't think they'd have paid £1 million book advance to him when he was 37 because he didn't have that profile. So his world was, kind of changed in his mid-40s. He says he had a midlife crisis in his 30s, and it's all that kind of period of, I think it's often there's negative connotations with middle-aged. It's that kind of, oh, you're so middle-aged. I think the middle age should be one that you go, well, I'm still fit and well. I want to know how to still be fit and well when I'm 80, But right now, I also need to celebrate the fact that I've had 25 years of doing a career and I've got a bit of wisdom. I can share that. I've brought up kids and I'm, all those things that we kind of have been juggling with, just take a bit of time to go, this is all right, actually, rather than thinking, oh my God, I need a facelift and to look 23. We're all getting older. That's a fact. There are no secret kind of potions being delivered on this podcast telling you can kind of, look young forever. It's not about the aesthetic. It's about being happy where you are, I guess, and trying to kind of acknowledge that you've done some stuff that's great.
Excellent. No, I really enjoy it as well. Fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Sue.
You've got teenage twins. I'm a twin, actually. I've got a twin brother. So
are you close?
We are really close, yeah. I've got 3 daughters and he's got 3 sons. So
wow.
Yeah. When he had his 3rd son, my dad said, that's enough. No more competition now, you two. That's it. But how do you balance your life in terms of that incredible, really busy career and then that family juggle too?
I think having a very good partner to do that with, Kenny was, when they were born, he was just finishing off playing professional rugby and starting his business. And so he said, I'm so happy I had that period, like few months with you where we were just going, what the hell's this? We've got these 2 babies, and how did this happen? And well, we know how it happened, but we were just kind of learning together and he took as much responsibility with things. If I after 6 weeks went off and did a Champions League game and it was only at Chelsea and I lived in Chiswick, so it wasn't far down the road, but that was quite early to go back and do. But I felt a bit pressured in my own personal kind of pressure to think, I've got to get on and do it. And I knew there'd be another game 2 weeks later, so it wasn't like I was going back to a 5-day week job. And he was like absolutely fine with being with the babies. There was no kind of sense of him the idea, when you hear people say daddy daycare or babysitting, you think, no, it's 50-50 here. I just happened to carry them for 9 months. So he's always been great like that. And when I've had to, my job takes me away from home, obviously, sometimes for 3 weeks if it's a World Cup or Olympic Games. And, as long as I've left enough lists and that's the control freak in me, then, we've managed to kind of, I'm always consulting. We're always consulting each other. And he's got better, like when they, were younger, at saying, oh, I'm going to be away this night. Is that okay? And he would say that. So it's not a case of me always saying I'm going away. It's otherwise that's not 50-50, is it? If there's only one person that reports in about their travel. So, and also I think looking after each other, and he's always been such a cheerleader for me, and he's always so supportive and loves what I do. And I guess it helps that our worlds sometimes cross over a little bit as well. So he gets what I do and I enjoy, his successes and what he's been up to. So I think that part of it, I love this age. The kids are so much fun at 15 and they've got so much to say, and they really, in fact, their joy and positivity actually is really helps in this whole Corona period, because I think it's so easy to get dragged down with the macro picture of doom and gloom. And actually, although the news is on and they listen to it and they're not naive, they look at the future and they're bright and they kind of want things to change. And so, I kind of, as much as I'm trying to keep a positive environment for them, I think they very much are helping us. Yeah.
And just finally, you've clearly got an enormous work ethic and a drive. But what advice would you give to young women who are coming in now and perhaps wanting to build a career in sports media today?
I think I said before about having a passion and loving what you do and being thorough. I think there was a bit of me at the beginning that felt I had to be better than the blokes around me, because if I made a mistake, it was going to have the spotlight shone on it. And I think you can't really always live like that. We say constantly to our kids, don't we, that making mistakes is what makes you better, and you only learn when you make mistakes. If you're perfect, you won't learn for the next time. Things will kind of not always go right, and you're going to have to learn through your career. But I think just being as thorough as you can with everything that you do, I say that to a man or a woman, in our career, will stand you in good stead. And having, your work ethic needs to be strong. You do some ugly shifts, there'll be some overnights. There'll be some times where you're, it's not a 9-to-5 job at all. And even when you're not working, you're working, because I wouldn't go, I'm not doing live telly now because I had a match cancelled this weekend. So I'm not doing live telly now for about 10 days. I'm not just going to turn off from sport, I'm not just going to kind of go, okay, well, that's it then. I'm just going to go and do some baking and go for a walk, because you have to, it's constantly there by osmosis, even if you're not writing it down, you need to be on top of it. So if you really are thinking that you enjoy it but maybe not so much, then you're probably not going to find it the career for you, I think.
Thanks again to Gabby for taking the time to talk to me. It was fascinating to hear about her career, and hopefully it will inspire others looking to work in sports broadcasting. Thanks also to Barclays for their kind support of the Game Changers, and to Sam Walker from What Goes On Media, who does a fantastic job as executive producer for the podcast. You can find out more about all 49 of my guests at fearlesswomen.co.uk. Previous trailblazing guests working in sports media include Claire Balding, Anna Kessel, Eleanor Oldroyd, Ebony Rainford-Brent and Jackie Oatley. You can also listen from the website or find us in all the usual podcast places, including Apple, Spotify and Google. It's always lovely to see your reviews and hear how much people are enjoying the stories of these game-changing women in sport. If you have a moment to give the podcast a rating, and 5 stars would be wonderful, it does make a big difference. You can also get in touch on social media, on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram at Sue Anstis or at The Game Changers. Next week, I have the absolute privilege of talking to Arsenal and England legend Rachel Yankey.
I remember walking to the dentist and there were some workmen. They said, "Oh, I know you. You're that girl that you got dropped from England and the coach didn't pick you. What is it you went and did? You go out drinking? Did you get caught doing it?" And I was like, "No, I did absolutely nothing." And that, to me, was probably the hardest thing, because words that were said about me led to perception of the outside world. And I suppose that's an everyday occurrence for the men's football players, but it isn't, and it wasn't for women's.
The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.